Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you.
Thank you, Kenneth and Tony and our band. Oh gosh, that's a wonderful experience of just connecting up and being a part of, remembering why we're really here and that we really are supported. This is, it's hard. Sometimes we don't get those messages, do we? Well, I'm here this morning to carry on the series that Reverend Michael has begun for this month in the transformation of things. And I was really struck by the old familiar story of the butterfly, right, in the chrysalis, the caterpillar being changed into something new, and his emphasis on how it's really changed from the inside out, how it has to let go of everything, literally. Dissolve in essence and be rebuilt, to be reborn into a new creature, not something that a caterpillar that you can just, as he said, glue wings onto, but truly reborn. And I began to wonder, what is that like in our own human experience? And my talk today is talking about the transformative power of grief, because I have come to understand in my own life that this is actually the doorway of a great transformation. No matter how many times we have to visit that doorway or go through that doorway or experience a loss, life is full of loss. It is, really. Life is a letting go. Some people say that when we let go in the birth canal, that our life of letting go simply continues until the ultimate letting go. And that while that seems like a real bummer, a real downer, it's actually a beautiful way of recognizing that we're not losing as we let go, but we're letting go of the limit that we have been contained in thus far, so that we can become more with each letting go. As the transformation of the caterpillar into a butterfly is a natural process and a letting go, so is grief an opportunity to really let go of the attachments that we have had to people or to places or things in our lives. We have a deep aversion for loss built into us, enculturated into us, supported actually. We have an ego that is always retrospectively looking back at all the losses we've had and the pain we've suffered and trying to prevent that when there's signs or symptoms in our horizon that tell us we could lose again, something's a threat, something's at stake. And we react with our sometimes ambient anxiety and neuroses even of trying to control and trying to hold on to. But life was never meant to be held on to. Life was meant to flow. And the only way it can flow is as we open, as we let go, as we allow, as we meet things as they come into our lives. The deep aversion and even fear of loss also leads us to denying our grief, because we feel we're judged by others, or we judge ourselves for not getting over it fast enough. We rationalize our loss. We distract ourselves away from feeling. We shut down the tears or sad memories any way we can very often. People grow uncomfortable when we bring our raw sadness into the conversation, so a lot of times we simply stop talking about it. All the other messages tell us grief is an imposition or a weakness. Dr. Rachel Naomi Riemann describes her experience as a young physician in pediatrics and how she was taught to be professional in the face of loss and how that teaching affected her over time. She says, the second day of my internship in pediatrics, I went with my senior resident to tell some young parents that the automobile accident from which they had escaped without a scratch had taken their only child. Very new to this doctor thing, when they cried, I had cried too. And it was after it was over, the senior resident took me aside and told me that I had behaved very unprofessionally. These people were counting on our strength, he told me. I had let them down. I took his criticism very much to heart. By the time I myself was a senior resident, I hadn't cried in years. During that year, a 2-year-old baby left unattended for just a moment had drowned in a bathtub. We fought to bring him back, but after an hour, we had to concede defeat. So taking the intern with me, I went to tell the parents that we had not been able to save their child. Overwhelmed, they began to sob. After a time, the father looked at me standing there, strong and silent in my white coat, the shaken intern by my side. "I'm sorry, doctor," he said. "I'll get a hold of myself in a minute." I still remember this man, his face wet with a father's tears, and I think of his apology now with shame. Convinced by then that my grief was a useless, self-indulgent waste of time, I had made myself into the sort of a person to whom one could apologize for being in pain in my presence. I remember a rotation on the pediatric service of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. During this rotation, we were actually losing a child a day. And every morning we would go and begin rounds in the autopsy room talking to the pathologist. And every morning I would leave the autopsy room and go back to the children's ward telling myself, well, on to the next case. This attitude, which was so prevalent in my training, also happened to be the approach to loss that I had in my family. The afternoon my 10-week-old kitten was run over, my mother took me to a pet store and bought me another. I was taught at a very early age that if something painful happened, the best thing to do was not to think about it and to get involved with something else. Unfortunately, in medicine, the something else I got involved with was often the next tragedy. The bottom line is that grieving is not meant to be of help to any particular patient. You grieve because it's of help to you. It enables you to go forward after loss. It heals you so that you are able to love again. On to the next is a denial of common humanity, an assertion that someone can die in front of us without touching us. It is a rejection of wholeness, of a human connection that is fundamental. And it makes no sense at all when you say it out loud. Chris Jordan says, grief is a felt experience of love for something that is lost or that we are losing. That is an incredible, powerful doorway. Why? Because we are remade by the full experience of loss. Grief is the process of letting go from the fabric of our psyche and growing new connections in our heart, our mind, and our souls to knit us together in a new way. Loss is like having something torn from our hearts, leaving like raw nerve endings of experience, memory, and love, exposed to the elements that has to be cauterized and healed, almost seemingly one nerve ending at a time. Everyone grieves losses differently, for different reasons, because of meanings or because of the nature of their relationship. We must not judge ourselves or one another by any standard or compare one kind of loss to another loss, not only in our own lives, but in the lives of others. We all grieve according to our own needs, and all we need do is lean in and support as best we can. I lost my father when I was 21 to cancer, and I did not have a close relationship with him. I had a lot of anger and judgment, and it had led me to leave the home as fast as I could. By the time I was 18, 19, I had been out on my own for 2 years when he died. And I had supported my mother, who had cared for him during that time, so that at the actual funeral, I didn't experience the loss of my father. I felt like in some ways I had lost my father a long time ago, or it wasn't a relevant emotional experience for me. But what I did do is cry at the funeral for my mother, and my tears were for her loss of her husband. It took me a decade, really, to come to terms with that and to grieve my own loss of my father. But even in that, even while I didn't experience what was a rational understanding of loss of relationship with my father, what I didn't understand was the tremendous emotional impact it had. I felt literally like, if I could describe it as this, I felt like I had been dropped off into the middle of an ocean of pain and sorrow. Salty water all around me, and no matter which way I turned in this bottomless, endless sea, there was no land in sight, no buoy, nothing to hold on to. And I didn't know how I got there, and I didn't know how to get out of it, and I didn't know what it meant because it didn't make any sense to me. And I had well-intentioned people who would come and tell me that because my father had died over a 2-year period, that at least I'd had a chance to say goodbye to him. And I thought to myself, I understood where that sentiment came from. They were comparing it to sudden loss, and I certainly appreciate those kinds of losses can feel very different. But I will tell you that what it sounded like to me was the difference between being dropped off in the Indian Ocean or in the Pacific Ocean, because it was just fathomless and endless, and I didn't know how to get out of it. Of course, I did what I could with it and eventually made it to the shore again. And as I saw land and as I saw the dry sand and as I started to come out, I was having better and better days where I wasn't lost in the sorrow and just the sadness or the heaviness or the pain, and was more and more having better and better days. But always inexplicably, I came out of science, so I looked at everything as a linear. I thought, well, I'm better, I should be better, 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 better. But suddenly, a big wave would come and knock me down again, or pull me in an undertow back out into water that I thought I had already come out of, you see. And I discovered that there's a rhythm to it, that there is a flow to it, until I finally was able to move out. And I recognized that the reason it's that way is because it's a natural, rhythmic process of life. We are born in rhythm. Our breathing at the end of life is a rhythm. Our breathing throughout life is a rhythm. It is the cycle of the planets and the earth. It is the cycle of all of life. It's a rhythm, and it's a returning. And it's always an endless moving upward. And so in this experience of my own father's passing and my loss of him, I had to say that this was a natural process that I could simply weather and go through. Vicki Harrison calls it this way. She says, grief is like the ocean. It comes on waves, ebbing and flowing. Sometimes the water is calm, and sometimes it is overwhelming. All we can do is learn to swim. Grief is cyclical and rhythmic, eases and returns with intensity unexpectedly. It uses psychic, spiritual, and physical energy just to endure it. It drains our ability to function at the levels we were used to before the loss. I worked in a hospital in my previous life before ministry, and I don't know how many of you have been in a building when emergency power comes on. Have you ever seen that? if you haven't been in there, what it happens is that when the main power goes off and emergency power surges on, it doesn't reconnect everything. And so what you'll find is walking down hallways, it's like every other light is on. Enough to see, and every plug doesn't work, but in the hospitals, the red plugs are the emergency power, so you can always find those for important equipment. And that's exactly what my life felt like while I was going through grief. I thought I should rationally be able to jump back into things and do what I was always doing, but I found myself forgetting things and losing things and misplacing keys and things I never do, and started to worry that this might be the new normal, that something had happened to me that wasn't irreparable, that wasn't going to come back together. And I assure people that I know that are going through that grief that this is not a new normal. It is simply normal for people who have lost. And that sometimes we're working with less energy. There's more healing going on, subterranean in us and unconscious to us, that is happening down here, that's sapping some of the energy we usually use to be full forward in our lives. So it really calls to us to be gracious with ourselves for renewal and to not jump back into our lives right away, full force, to do some things that really help us to work fewer hours if we have control over that, to be able to take more breaks, to be more restful, to hang out with friends we know love us and can hear us and can support us, and our very favorite relatives. You know what I mean, right? Those people we love the best. You know, it's about us for right now. Let's just say it that way. We try to draw to us those that can really nurture and love us. Lots of naps, nurturing food, walks or hours by the sea or a lake. Immerse ourselves in poetry and music and art and nature. Self-care creates plenty of space in the chrysalis of your becoming, this new creature. We think of grief and loss as sidelining us. You know, it's like, well, I'm sidelined. And actually, I think in the workplace, we often get that sense. Oh, you know, she's grieving. She's going to go handle that. And then, you know, she's going to be back here in a couple of days, and she'll be back. We'll just save it for her when she gets back, right? I mean, that's what we think. We think it's like this, that we were on a highway, and we just, our car has a problem, and we sideline. We sit over by the side of the road. We wait for a repair. We get it all back humming again. And then we think what we're going to do is we're going to step back on the highway right where we left off and head on down where we were headed before. But we don't know that depending on the depth of the loss and how fully we may engage and allow a natural process of grief to work in us, to be the sacred journey of that grief, to really reveal to us new meanings, we become a new creature. And I'm going to tell you, not only are we not necessarily getting back on where we got off, we're not necessarily going in that same direction anymore. We may be taken off in a whole different trajectory altogether that was unknown to us because we didn't know what was truly important, what things really mattered, and maybe even who we really are. Grief fully processed through us, this natural process, is different for each of us, but it structurally rebuilds us from the inside out. One piece, one memory, one function at a time, making new meanings and bringing new understanding about life and ourselves. It remodels us with greater resilience and strength and hollows us out with more spaciousness and compassion. It fills us with love, more love than we could hold before. We were broken. Leonard Cohen wrote, "I greet you from the other side of sorrow and despair with a love so vast and shattered. It will reach you everywhere." After a loss, we are processed into a new life. The other thing we may notice is that we become less fearful of loss. It's not courage exactly, because courage is standing up in the face of fear. When we have lost and grieved and healed, we fear loss less and less because we have learned who we really are, and that what we have lost has changed form so that it can be with us forever. And that is the truth. Kate Braestrup says, "Walk fearlessly into the house of mourning, for grief is just love squaring up to its oldest enemy. And after all these mortal human years, love is up to the challenge." Dr. Riemann shares another story toward the end of her career, when she worked with doctors and health professionals by then, helping them process their emotions and their losses and find deeper meaning in their work. She says a physician specialist in palliative care talked about an experience he had while caring for a hospitalized young man who was dying of AIDS. Both the patient and his family were bitter, rejecting, and hostile despite his efforts to reach out to them. Finally giving up on it, he had simply delivered the best technical care he knew. At 3 o'clock one morning, he was called by the nurses who informed him that his patient had died and asked him to come in to pronounce him dead and sign the death certificate. Remembering that he needed to be at rounds very early the next morning, he hastily threw clothes over his pajamas and began driving to the hospital. As he drove down the darkened streets, he spontaneously looked up and saw the night sky as if he was seeing it for the first time. The darkness seemed a silent and holy emptiness without beginning or end. And in this vastness, stars hung as countless pure points of radiance. He had never seen the night in this way before and was filled with an awe and a profound feeling of peace and gratitude. His intellect attempted to dismiss this as fanciful, pointing out the need to hurry and take care of business so as to be able to get up early the next morning. But he stopped his car by the side of the road anyway. He got out and allowed the experience of awe to just simply wash over him. In about 15 minutes, it had receded, and he drove out onto the hospital under a sky that looked pretty much the way it always had before. The experience had been brief, but powerful and surprisingly important to him, although he couldn't really say why. Together, in the group of physicians he told the story to, they all considered what this experience may possibly have meant. Various interpretations were offered, but the one that stopped further conversation was that perhaps the patient, in passing onward, may have found a way to share his present perspective directly with his doctor as an apology and a parting gift. As one of the doctors put it, perhaps at the moment of death, there is a reclaiming of wholeness, and that wholeness may pass very close to us. Rumi says, grief can be the garden of compassion. If you keep your heart open through everything, your pain can become your greatest ally in your life's search for love and wisdom. Albert Camus said, "Blessed are the hearts that can bend, for they shall never be broken." And so I leave this blessing for you. May you fearlessly allow loss to touch you at depth. Let grief rock you in its healing, transforming arms until you unfold your new, beautiful wings and fly. God bless you all.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.